Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Win the Hour, Win the Day. I am your host, Chris Ward, and today we have Stacey Shipman in the house. Now, Stacey is going to talk to us about networking, engaging, and really how you can sell yourself and your services effectively while networking. Stacey, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Chris. It's good to be here.
All right. So you're all about this. You're the co-host of Engage the Room podcast, and you're all about, facilitating and face-to-face networking, virtual, we're going to call, I don't know what that was. We're going to call it, I'm still going to call it face-to-face when we're doing virtual, right? Mm-hmm. Okay. So a lot of us don't like networking. And I know I've sort of used excuses in the past for this, although I did it back in the day when business was new and I would go to the breakfast or whatever, the local business, when my business was still local, because now it's very global. But for me, I did okay when I had to go to the breakfasts, because then I thought, well, there's a purpose and a goal and there's somebody sitting beside you. And then I didn't like but the downside to that is if you didn't like who's sitting beside you, or like it was not a whole lot of conversation going there. Mm-hmm. But then there's other events where you're just supposed to mingle and network. And I don't know. To me, it seemed like, okay, I'm supposed to elbow my way in and try to have engaging conversation with you, but there was no framework. So, and I'm pretty confident, comfortable, outgoing, and yet I found it a chore. So I know there's people that, as I'm told all the time, don't have my energy. And so if it was a chore for me, my heavens, hello. Mm-hmm. And then we can always lean into but I'm really busy. I have important work to do. And then you go to this event and it's like, this wasn't fun. Yeah. So I should have just stayed hiding behind the desk.
Right.
So there I've just purged all my concerns. You can start from there.
Your concerns you're not alone in your concerns. And, okay. As you said, even though you might be outgoing and big energy, it's awkward for so many people.
Yeah.
Granted, the folks who tend to gravitate towards me and my message are quieter. I work with a lot of technically trained, analytically minded, even shy, introverted folks. So I do tend to work in that space, but it's awkward for everybody. And I am one of those analytically minded, shy people who has come out of my shell over the last 15 years. But I remember going into my first networking event, and it was exciting because I was just starting my business at a corporate. But as I walked into that, or down the hall into that room, my heart rate started, my heart was beating really fast. My hands were shaking and sweating. And I was like, what if they don't like me? What if they think my business is silly? What if? And then I ended up walking in after I almost left. I almost didn't go in, but I didn't want to get another job. And I was greeted so warmly by the director of the organization. And she immediately introduced me to somebody. So I didn't have to walk in this room on my own, full of strangers, having never done this before. And I share that because it's awkward for a lot of us for a few reasons. One, some of us are shy. We don't have the skill or knowledge or confidence to do it. We're not sure how to talk about ourselves. If we walk into a group that's already established, you can feel cliquey, and then you're not really sure if you're welcome or if you belong there. And I don't know about you, Chris, but I've walked into meetings over the years where nobody even greets you at the door. Yeah. And if you're new to that group, that's a little unnerving. That's unsettling because you're not really sure what to do or what to expect. So there's so many reasons why it's awkward and uncomfortable and unnatural. And I think how you're greeted and how you're set up to be successful in that space, in that setting, has a lot to do with it, as well as your own individual, how you show up personally.
Yeah. So you can't control how the event is run. I've seen ones run better, and even virtually here, you're going to hear all the ugly side of of me, because when you're so time pressured as an entrepreneur, and we're all about creating your win team and being in that win formula, 60% creation, 40% admin mode. And most entrepreneurs are just trapped in that web of admin 80, 90% of the time. Right. Mm-hmm. And so they're always racing the clock and they're like, oh, I got to go network. And then it just seems like when you have so much to do, to take a step out and, without any sort of clarity or guidelines, or is this event going to be worth my time? Mm-hmm. And then how do you measure that? Just because it didn't happen today, you didn't make a solid connection, doesn't mean it's not accumulative, right? There's all that. But the dark side of it is I've done even virtual events where, okay, I'm just going to tell you the way it is. I don't like games. I don't want to go, like, I'm not a go to a wedding shower, baby shower thing, and we play this game with whatever. Like, I just don't have that in me. And so the other side, sometimes you get to these network things, even online, and they're like, oh, we're trying to make everybody engaged. And it's just, forgive me for saying this, but in my mind, it's silliness, right? Mm-hmm. So I agree. So then you could have somebody that's really trying to be structured. It's not for me, but I do understand the power of networking, because I've talked about this on the show before, where I have gotten busy in the past when my business was newer, and then lost connections with people because I didn't sustain that relationship. So I wasn't networking, because I always think, well, if I have a reason to call them, I will, but I wasn't maintaining or nurturing the relationship. Mm-hmm. So then I lost really important relationships because I hadn't talked to them in 3 years. You can't just call somebody every 3 to 4 years and say, okay, what are you doing now? Because I'd like to chime back in. So I realized I was rotating relationships. So I do believe very much in the power of networking. But how can we, Stacey, navigate our own map? How can we sort of control it so that we can, figure this out and do it so it's purposeful and not be victim to somebody else's system, and then also that awkwardness? How can you help us?
So my approach to everything is what I call shed the formality. And there's all these beliefs and behaviors that we've built up over time, or that we think, that other people do, that don't fit who we are. And we have to have the strength and confidence to say that doesn't work for me, and I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to do it that way, quite frankly. And that's easier said than done, of course. So the first of it is being aware, being aware of how you feel about networking, be aware of how you're showing up when you're networking. Yeah. Are you nervous? Are you excited? Are you overly energetic, not letting anybody else have a word in? So there's, our own presence. Then there's the message, how we talk about ourselves and our work in a compelling way, but also being able to elicit that information from others. And then the third part for me is, as you've already touched on, is the after you go to an event or you meet somebody, is the staying in touch and the follow-up. And that, I see people falter across the spectrum of what I just said, but the follow-up and the after part is really where people, they don't do it. And whether it's because they don't want to bother people, or they don't know that it's part of the process. I know I didn't when I first walked in to a networking event. It's because my husband had told me, if you want to start a business, you need to network. I didn't know what that meant. I worked in the corporate world. I didn't have to network. I was a behind the scenes person. So I thought naively that I was going to go in this room, meet all these people, and they would become my client. And at the time I was in actually the wellness space. So I wasn't doing what I'm doing now. And that was so not true.
No,
So
and worse than that, when you're in there, if you're under the guideline, the misconception that you go in there and you're going to get all these new clients, like they're selling to this people who are selling. So they're in there trying to sell to you. Right. And if it's not done well, it's just like, a dog fight, really.
Yes. And what I've learned, and I think this is also a mistake or a myth or whatever you want to call it, networking is not selling.
No.
It's relationship building. It's making connections. It's meeting people. And those people might become your clients in the future. Yeah. They might become supporters or people that you can just turn to for, support, encouragement. I'm having a bad day, that kind of thing. They might become your coach. Maybe you hire them or some other support system that you need for your business. They might be a referral partner or collaborator. There's all different reasons we need to meet people as business owners. It's not only to get clients. And I think there is a real misconception that networking equals selling. And if you haven't sold anything, you are not effective at it. And that can often take the pressure off for people who feel awkward about it, because it's like, oh, okay, I only have to meet a few people. And then the real work starts after you leave. You've met them, if you're online, you're now connected maybe on LinkedIn, or you got their email or something. But it really is that follow-up. The event is the catalyst for the connection. And the real work happens afterwards. The consistency, the staying in touch, the continuing to develop the relationship, and recognize that takes time to build trust, and you may not get the client right away or an opportunity right away.
That's a really good point, because I know in theory you're not there to sell, but yet I'm not sure I knew that in my heart. Like, you think, yeah, I think, here's what I think. I think, it's rude to go in and try to sell. Mm-hmm. But I do think somewhere in the back of your mind, we all equate that with, well, did I get a solid lead out of this? So does that mean it's worth my time? Because that time is often pulled away from something else that we always think we could be doing. Like, oh, I could be over here behind this computer banging this out, and I was over there possibly making a connection that might pay off 2 years down the road when I have to get this done today. Right. Mm-hmm. But as I listen to you talk, and I think, and I listen to you talk, and I rethink my perception of this, it kind of now reminds me of like, well, we go on social media and we don't expect to sell instantly. We want people to know, like, and trust us. And so we understand that we need to be seen and people need to get to know us. And that's the long game. Mm-hmm. And so you're right. I think most of us may say the right thing, but instinctually our gut thinks it's a failure if we didn't get any leads out of that.
No. Exactly. Right? Okay. Exactly.
So then the follow-up, which I'm certain I dropped the ball for years, and I think I'm doing a better job of it now, but we can definitely always improve on it. What do you think a good follow-up looks like?
If you made a connection with somebody, a good well, let me tell you what I think a bad follow-up looks like.
Yeah, let's start there. We can probably identify with that quicker. Yeah.
A bad follow-up is a no follow-up at all. So you went to the event and you thought, I met these people. Why aren't they contacting me? That's bad. But that, I don't like to judge. That's not effective. I've also seen people simply send a blanket email, even a BCC. So if they got the list, of attendees, they BCC the whole list and say, it was so great to meet all of you. And it's like, well, you probably didn't meet everybody. So let's personalize this a little bit. So don't avoid the blanket BCC. And then I've seen the kind of form letter, if you will, to an individual. It's like, great to meet you. Here's my newsletter. Let's stay in touch. And it's like, even though it's only a newsletter and you're not asking them for any money, it still feels a little quick.
Yeah.
So I mean, this is my approach. I share it with other people. Everybody's got to figure out what works for them based on the connection they made and the people that they think they want to be in touch with. But the folks that I want to meet they are focused on building a relationship. They see it as a long-term. So if I met somebody and felt like I made a connection, then I will say to them in the moment of that meeting, whether it's online or in person, I really enjoyed this conversation. Are you open to, I'd love to continue this conversation and see how we might support each other, learn more about what you're doing. And share more about what I'm doing and see if there's any opportunities, whether it's more introductions or actual business opportunities. That's yet to be determined. And if they say yes, then I'll follow up, by the next day and say, great to meet you yesterday, following up to set up that next phone call or a walk or or a Zoom call, however you want to do that. And actually get it on the calendar. So for me, the follow-up when you've made a good connection is actually a phone call. Talk to them, Zoom call, get in touch.
Okay.
And again, not to sell yet.
No.
But to dig in deeper, because usually at a networking event, you just have a few minutes, but if you've made a connection. So I like to have a further conversation to see if there's anything worth staying in touch about. That's my approach. You can connect with them on LinkedIn and say, hey, we met yesterday. I'd love to stay in touch here online. That's definitely a more passive way to do things, but I think still relevant. And that way you can follow them and see what kind of information they post and post back and you can stay top of mind with them that way.
Yeah. And
that's the initial follow-up, which I just finished this, is different from consistently staying in touch.
Okay. So as you say that, I know for a long time I had to push back on the virtual coffees. I was like, listen, what is this, right? Like, what do you want from me? I don't want to do a virtual coffee and hop on a Zoom call. Cause I sort of didn't get the agenda. And I just felt sometimes people hopped on it too quick, like through LinkedIn. I didn't know them, like, oh, let's see if there's whatever, some alignment here. And I'm like, okay, I didn't trust them. I didn't that they're going to try to sell me. So I did get better. Now I'm more selective, but I will do virtual coffees and they've been quite successful for me. So it is about relationship building. So I sort of bought into that. And as you're talking, I realized I get a lot of praise for videos. I send out little short videos to thank somebody for something or to get on somebody else's podcast, or I've gotten a lot of really positive feedback on how I market myself on the videos. But now I realize, even just checking in on my list, somebody that I could be sending them a video saying, hey, I just want to chime in. I saw a few things you're doing this week on social media. I want to cheer you on, let you know I'm watching. So again, I guess come up with your own plan, but make these things meaningful because the blanket, I know I had recently, somebody reached out to me and I'm again, trying to be more open. And he's like, okay, let's connect. And it was through LinkedIn. Right. And I was like, okay. So then he moved it to his assistant, which is fine because I'm all about teams. So then she gave me some dates and I said, okay, great. We'll pick this one. And I said, here's my Zoom link. And then she said, well, he prefers phone calls. What's your phone number? I'm like, okay, I'm not getting a job interview. Right.
Right. Yeah.
And then he also made a mistake on LinkedIn and he said, where are you? I don't have the link or whatever. And I'm like, what are you talking about? Well, he got me mixed up with somebody else. So then I realized he's just blitzing all this stuff. And now you're telling me what he prefers. I'm like, okay, I just backed right out and said, this is going in the wrong direction because I can see it's a numbers game for you.
Yeah.
So I think we've all seen that, but what you have to learn is not to then just say that's your excuse and I'm no longer doing this.
Right. I hear you on that. And I've had that happen to me as well. That whole, I think they're doing this to everybody. And when someone comes back to me and they don't know what the link is or what my phone number is, when they've done all the scheduling, that is such a red flag for me, which is why again, this is my approach. I much prefer making first contact face-to-face. I like, because so I like making contact face-to-face and then staying in touch through social media.
Okay. Let me interject here.
Yeah.
We're agreeing that face-to-face can be video, can be virtual.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Especially these days. I used to do a ton in person, haven't obviously because of the pandemic. And now I love the Zoom, being on Zoom and video. It's so efficient. I host, my own online and from 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. That's it. There's no travel. There's no snowstorms to worry about. It's so fantastic.
And there's not even that, but geographically, like I've got clients in England and Australia and everywhere. So obviously if I was just networking face to face, it would be a very small business for me because I live in the country now. But so what I would say is, okay, this is awesome. I also too, like I'm a horrible human being at this point because I will not get on a phone call with somebody because to me, it's so like ordering a pizza now. It seems so disconnected. And if you don't know what somebody's face looks like, I feel like, how could we have started a relationship? That's my thing. So I just won't do phone calls. Sorry, everyone. I sound like I'm all kinds of bossy, but I'm looking for, if we're going to do this, let's do it right.
Yes. And I will reiterate and do what works for you.
Yeah.
Do what works for you. There's all sorts, and I can share tips and I'm sure you can share tips, and there's all sorts of people sharing tips and techniques, and it's great to hear them. And then, you really have to, I have a yoga background, so I get a little mind body with some of what I do, but you have to feel it. If it doesn't feel right, like it literally will feel tense in your body if you're doing something that does not fit who you are. And that, for me, that's part of the shed the formality approach. Is I'm not a cold caller. I'm never going to cold call you. But if I met you in face to face, if I heard you on a podcast, I think podcasts are an untapped networking opportunity because
they're everything. They changed everything for me.
Yes. Not only do we now have a relationship, Chris, or, this conversation, but anybody listening,
Yeah.
has, I think, a warm opportunity to say, hey, Chris, I heard this episode, or hey, Stacey, I heard you on Chris's podcast. I'd love to, keep talking to you about networking. Again, it's not about selling. It's about making the connection. And when you reach out through a podcast and say, I heard you on this episode, I loved what you said about XYZ. I mean, be specific. Don't just be blanket.
Yeah.
I heard the podcast. Like,
yes.
Did you? I don't know,
But I love what you're doing on your podcast. It's awesome. You're awesome. Fill in the blank here. I like to be guest on your show.
Right?
Yeah. Because I'm not like, hello. And I never do that to somebody else. I'm very specific, but people do that all the time. Like, oh, you have a spectacular podcast, and fill in blank here. So here's the thing. How often, backing up for a second about finding out what fits for you. I do remember being at a virtual event not too long ago, and I got there and it was one of these ridiculous game things that was just so over the top, not for me. And I could literally feel my body shifting. Like all of a sudden I felt like I was in French class where I don't know any of the words and everybody else is speaking a different language. I'm like, oh, I do not. Like, how do I pretend that I've got bad Wi-Fi and just hit a button and get out of here? So it would not have brought out the best in me if you met me. It was like, I don't want to play this game. I don't want to do this. So then you're right. The people meeting me that day think, oh, I'm coming off indifferent or I'm uncomfortable. So it's not going to be fun. Right. How often, so the follow-up can be on social media afterwards. How often should we stay in touch? What does a good follow-up, what does the consistency look like?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it depends. It depends on how great of a connection it was. So there are people that I talk to that I am in touch with very often. I mean, sometimes weekly, sometimes every couple of weeks, but they're my inner circle. So there's different layers of connection. And so you figure who's in your inner circle, and good practice for that I've been taught and I use is, who are your top 50?
Okay.
And those people you can stay in touch with however often you want. That might be friends, it might be family, it would be really close colleagues that you've met, and you might be in touch with them weekly or even more frequently than that. And then you can expand that circle to say like top 100, the next 100 people, and they might be every month or every 3 months. I definitely think a minimum of, I like quarterly at least, just to say hello. And again, it's not selling anything. It's simply a, hey, I've been thinking about you, or I saw this article, reminded me of the conversation we had. I thought you might like it. How are things going? It's just a simple reach out. And every 3 months, some people will say twice a year. Again, you have to figure out what makes sense for you from a time frame perspective. And then, of course, there's a newsletter that might be less personal connection, but people who you still keep in touch with.
I think as you're talking, it's really opening up things I hadn't thought about. So, you're right. It's different relationships. Like I speak to my mother every day, and then I speak to my niece every week. And so there's different relationships that, you have different levels of commitment or intimacy. But now I realize, what, the top 50, you could say, once a quarter, I could send them a 2-minute video. I really love, what you're doing on social media, blah, blah, blah. And of course, it be sincere and not generic and not blasting other people, a video to you about you. And then I thought, as you were talking, I'm like, okay, so the second 50, who's not as immediate a connection, people, I would do an audio on their Facebook, like send them a message, an audio, hey, just want to check in, whatever. So it's really making me rethink the commitment to the relationships and how I can, like in your personal life, how you display not affection, but I guess commitment or care.
I call it caring. People, if you want people to be on board with you, whether that's buy what you're selling or be an advocate for you, promote on your behalf, they have to know you care, and staying in touch that way, even if it's a text, an audio, however you do it, a simple like, hey, been thinking about you, can go a long way, especially these days.
Yeah, that's true. Because in my personal life, I'm very passionate about that. Like I've been very blessed where if I've lost somebody, I know that I did my best through that whole relationship. I was always very big on telling people what I think, because I think we have a habit telling other people how great that person is and not to the person, right? Just as a praise. So, all right, well, it's such a simple thing, I have to say, Stacey. And I was like, okay, all right, what are networking? But it really, I think it's like anything done well, the slightest changes really change the result. Almost like if you're cooking something, the little too much or not enough spice changes the whole recipe, right?
Yeah, it does.
Fabulous.
And the one other thing I would say is, if you don't like what's available to you, start your own thing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what I did. And I did it in part because I like it. I like hosting. I like gathering people. I've always been that way since I was young. But I didn't like, again, I don't like walking in a room and not being greeted. There were certain things that I thought could be better, especially since I work a lot with quieter, shyer folks who are very uncomfortable doing that. And I made a commitment to myself that you might walk in a stranger to one, whether it's a workshop or an event, whatever, but you will not leave as one. And I have made a commitment to that, and it's worked. And so it doesn't have to be dreadful or draining or anxiety provoking if you have the right setting.
So networking in German or whatever doesn't mean painful experience, long lasting. Okay. All right, Stacey, where can they find you online? Where can they network with you, Stacey?
Yeah, absolutely. I have engagetheroom.com is my website. There is an events tab that has the calendar. Everything I do right now is on Zoom. So I have welcomed people from across the United States and Europe and internationally. So it's been awesome. It's been awesome.
Well, and you're awesome too. So thank you so much. Your insights were just very helpful to me. I got to get off this call and start networking.
I
got to do a better job. I have made my notes. I'm on it. Okay. All right, guys, we will see you on the next episode. Thanks so much.